will be the same, except the pressure is lower. Yeah, that's the only difference. We can start anywhere on this diagram, but let's just start here, just for somewhere to start with the electrocardiogram. Here we are, and the P wave. Now we know that the P wave is what? Atrial depolarization. And so when you think about atrial depolarization, what you could imagine is there'll be a little bit of an atrial contraction following that at some point, won't there? Because that's what the depolarization is all about. Just as the QRS is ventricular depolarization, isn't it? So following that depolarization, you'd expect to see ventricular muscle contracting, wouldn't you? Okay, so here's the P wave, and here we've got changes in pressure, here we've got changes in volume, left side, ventricular volume, and here we've got the status of the valves at the different stages of the cardiac cycle. So if we come down here, atrial depolarization, and we come down here, is it something to do with the aorta? No. Is it something to do with the left ventricle? No. Is it something to do with the atria in the yellow there? Yes. And surprise, surprise, following the P wave of P wave, we come down here, if we use a ruler, you can see atrial contraction, can't you? Or atrial systole, if you like. And of course, as the atria contract, there's a bit of a pressure build-up, isn't there, in the atrium? And we can see that here in the yellow. And what's the purpose of this? The purpose of this stage of the cardiac cycle is to move blood from the atria into the ventricles, isn't it? So what we can see is, looking at the yellow here, we can see there's not much pressure change here. We come to the cycle, remember. You can see towards the end there's an atrial systole. So what does that mean? It means that as the atrioventricular valve opens, here it is opening, the atrioventricular valve opens, here we are, blood will move from the left atrium into the left ventricle, won't it? To a large extent it moves by gravity, yeah, just like the tanks of water on the roof, feeding your water supply system by gravity. But then, when the atria give a bit of a contraction, more blood is moved from the left atrium to the left ventricle, yeah? And of course, if you get more atrial contraction, you're going to get more blood moved, aren't you? Yeah? So when we start running down stairs, the heart works harder, doesn't it? So the atrial contraction will be more, so more blood will be moved from the atrium to the ventricles, yeah? When we rest, when we relax, we're in the room here, you get less atrial contraction, you need less blood. Okay, so that's the P wave, I think we've got that. And here we can see the ventricular volume changing. Here it is, this two-phase cycle, remember, comes back here. And this is the gravity effect, if you like. And this last little bit here, as you see, corresponds to atrial systole, when a bit more blood is moved. The volume increases a little bit more. And then we've got the QRS up here. The QRS, remember, is ventricular depolarization, isn't it? We'd expect to see some changes in pressure following that. So down we come. And first heart sound, second heart sound. Remember, those heart sounds represent closure of valves, don't they? Closure of valves. So if we come down here, what's closing? The atrioventricular valves are moving from the open to the closed state, aren't they? Here, closure, the second, what's happening? The aortic and pulmonary valves are moving from open to closed state. And remember, we have this isovolumetric point here in this white bar, or this. The isovolumetric means same volume. To have same volume, it means that these valves must be both closed, mustn't they, on the left and right side. If either of the valves were open, blood would leak out, wouldn't it? But to maintain the same volume in the ventricle, the valves top and bottom must be closed. And sure enough, during these isovolumetric periods, during these isovolumetric periods, you can see that the valves are all closed. So, there's an isovolumetric period during contraction, and there's an isovolumetric period during relaxation. Can you see? Isovolumetric contraction, okay, and isovolumetric during the relaxation phase. Yep. Okay, so QRS, ventricular depolarization, come down here, what's happening? You can see that the ventricle, the pressure in the ventricle is increasing because the electrical activity, this QRS, this depolarization, is spreading through the left ventricle, and the left ventricle is starting to contract, isn't it? But initially the valve is closed. The valve is closed during this isovolume, so the pressure is increasing, but blood's going nowhere as the valve's closed. As the pressure builds up, at some critical point, the pressure in the left ventricle is higher than in the aorta. So the aortic valve will open, and now it's like this chamber and this are the same, one and the same, aren't they? So the pressure will rise in the ventricle, it will rise in the aorta at the same rate, won't it? Because the door is open. And sure enough, that's what you can see here. The green is aortic pressure, and the orange is ventricular pressure. And as soon as the aortic valve opens, the pressure will be the same, won't it, in both? And at this critical moment, since the aortic valve is opened, blood is now free to pass from the left ventricle into the aorta. And so what you can see here is this reduction in volume. So the end diastolic volume, remember, is the volume of blood after the filling stage, and the end systolic volume down here is the amount of blood that's left at the end of the contraction stage. And the difference between the two is the stroke volume, isn't it? How much blood comes out each beat. So remember that. The difference between the end diastolic volume and the end systolic volume is the stroke volume, the amount of blood that comes out of the heart with each beat. And in this example, you've got what, roughly 130 mils here, and you've got roughly 70 down here. 130 minus 70 gives us the stroke volume. Yeah? That's how much blood came out in that particular beat. It's not always the same. It's not always the same. You can eat into this cardiac reserve more and more, so it's not 70, 60, 50. Do you know what I mean? You can eat into that cardiac reserve more, so you can increase the stroke volume and increase the cardiac output. You see the idea? Lots of words there and talk, but can you see the idea? You can pretty much start anywhere you like here, and you can follow through the logic of what's going on in the cardiac side. In fact, you could even start with this. Forget about this altogether. You could start with atrial depolarization, couldn't you? And you could follow through the story just looking at this diagram if you wanted, in terms of changes in pressure and changes in volume. You could essentially build this from this. Good. So, done with that. Let's just, before I forget, do the attendance.